Good evening. Welcome to the City of Opa-locka, our first budget hearing. I'd like to call this meeting to order. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Commissioner Bass. I'm here. Commissioner Davis,
Here.
Mayor Pygott.
I'm here. Commissioner Bass, can you lead us in invocation?
Father, we just want to say thank you. We say thank you, Lord God, for life, strength, health. Father God, we ask you that you would grant us this day wisdom, knowledge, revelation, and understanding. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen. Pledge of allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America, and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
All right, this is our budget hearing. We have our first reading of our ordinance for public hearing. Madam Clerk, 5A.
An ordinance of the City Commission of the City of Opa-locka, Florida, adopting a final millage rate pursuant to section 200.065, the Florida statutes for fiscal year 2021 through 2022, commencing October 1, 2021 through September 30, 2022, setting forth public hearing dates, providing for adoption of representations, providing for repeal of all prior ordinances in conflict, providing for severability, providing for an effective date. This is sponsored by the city manager.
All right, do I have a motion?
Move it.
Moved by Commissioner Davis, second by
Second.
Commissioner Bass. Mr. Manager, could you introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Mr. Anthony, if you can come up.
Excuse me, I'm sorry. I apologize. This is a public hearing item. Public hearing is open.
Mr. Mayor, we
Madam,
do have two individuals that register to speak virtually, former Commissioner Dorothy Johnson and also former Commissioner Joseph Kelly.
all right, could you go through the, read through the protocols that govern public comment collect hearing, and then IT, are they online? Okay,
Yeah, yes. Good evening. City of Opa-locka Commission meetings are held in person at Shabandi Village Auditorium, 215 Purvis Avenue, Opa-locka, Florida. Members of the public wishing to address the commission may do so in person or virtually. Those persons wishing to participate virtually should register prior to the scheduled meeting time on the city's website at www.opalockafl.gov. When speaking before the commission, please make sure to give your full name and address for the record. There is a 3-minute time limit for public comments. Please adhere to the decorum policy, which is part of the commission meeting agenda. City commission meetings are aired through live stream at www.youtube.com/user/City of Opa-locka.
thank you, Madam Clerk. Public hearing is open. We'll first have, who's online? All right, Ms. Dorothy Johnson. All right, Ms. Johnson, you should be able to speak now. Madam Clerk.
Hello?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you. First of all,
All right, you want to, Ms. Johnson, it seems as though there's an echo. So if you either have another account on somewhere else, you may want to log out of that account, because we can hear an echo in the background. So that may make it difficult for us to hear you.
Yeah, I wasn't able to get on the other one, so I came back on the phone.
So yeah, try and cut that one off, so we can hear you.
It's,
Or Mr. IT, are you able to just block that other account, one that she's not speaking on? Are you able to remove that?
I logged off. I wasn't able to get on the other one, so I came back on.
All right, you should be able to speak now. Ms. Johnson? All right, so while we're experiencing a little technical difficulties, please forgive us. We'll wait for Ms. Johnson to come back on, but in the meantime, Mr. Joseph Kelly.
Hello,
Yes, we can hear you.
Mr. Mayor.
Yes, sir. We can hear you loud and clear.
Thank you very much. Good evening. I am Reverend Joseph L. Kelly, 45 Dunette Avenue, Opa-locka, Florida. I first want to thank all of you for the additional $1,000 to make it $2,000 in order to honor and celebrate the life of Dr. King. But I am somewhat disappointed, however, at the presentation listed in your events depicting the MLK Walk. It's more than just a casual walk by elected officials around the city. I would hope you would revisit how you portray such an important legacy for our city and our country. Second, I recall prior to leaving office requesting dollars be set aside for all employees for raises and or at least the cost of living. And I was told that unfortunately, which I was aware of, money was tight, audits weren't complete, and funding sources were not yet released, and that the unions were in negotiations. Here we are later, and the general fund is increased. Money's being allocated for special things, but nothing yet for all employees. I would ask you to consider at least a 3% cost of living increase for all employees. They've worked over the years with no pay increase, even through a pandemic. So in my opinion, it's the least that can be done. I say that because obviously the city is in better financial shape since you're lowering the millage rate a full 3. And if you can't do it now, you at least consider a budget amendment after the first quarter when your ad valorem tax revenue starts to come in, since you're still, I guess, negotiating with the unions. I'm also asking the city commission to put the proper signage on the seniors bus. I was told last year there was no money, it would be addressed later. Here we are a year later and still no seniors on the move logo or name on the bus. As most of you know, the bus was purchased for the seniors of our city, so why not acknowledge that properly? I know sometimes you do use for other reasons, but it's really for the seniors. So that's the way of not only marketing, but letting our seniors know that there is transportation that can assist them in getting to our programs. Finally, I hope the city will appropriate some funding or some resources to address the homeless and mental health challenges in our community. You've noticed there's a lot of homelessness, there's a lot of mental health challenges. So I would hope the city would consider either partnering or putting some funding or resources aside to address that in this budget process. Thank you for allowing me to speak, and have a blessed evening. Thank you very much.
All right. Is there Ms. Johnson on the line? All right, so we have another budget item. Hopefully we can get her back on the line during the public hearing. So are there any other public hearing? All right, public hearing for agenda item 5A is closed. All right, we have a motion and second on the floor. Mr. Manager, could you introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I ask for Mr. Anthony to come up and introduce this item. Budget Administrator, thank you.
Good evening, Mayor, Commissioners, City Manager, City Attorney. The first thing I have to do as part of the trim requirements is to read the following. The taxing authority for the hearing tonight is the City of Opa-locka. The tentative millage rate of 9.6500 mils is needed to fund the tentative FY22 budget and is 4.72% greater than the current year rollback rate of 9.2148 mils. The need for this millage rate and increase is increase in the property tax revenue will be used primarily to further enhance public safety and to broaden and enhance the service provided by the Parks and Recreation Department. Too close.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, hold on. Commissioner Davis?
Yes, I just want to ask Mr. Anderson, for that
Hold on,
exact
hold on.
number.
Hold on, what, did you complete the trim notice?
Basically, that basically covers it. I just wanted to add the fact that the 9.6500 mils is going to provide to the proposed plan $11.2 million for the general fund, another $884,000 for the CRA fund.
Okay.
That completes my presentation.
I just wanted
Commissioner Davis?
to ask what was the exact amount of the rollback rate? I thought I heard 9.28 mils. Was that the?
And IT, I'm having a hard time hearing.
Yeah.
So I don't know if it's something with the speakers or the mic. I know everyone is speaking to the mic, but we are having a little difficulty hearing up here.
My mother always told me I mumbled. That might be part of it.
Yeah, did you hear it?
Commissioner Davis, in response to your question, the rollback rate is 9.2148.
91214. Okay, thank you, Mr. Anderson.
Sir.
Any other discussion on this item? Any other comments, Mr. Manager, anything else?
No, sir.
All right, any other discussion? Okay. All right. Do like to state that we are slowly but surely moving this millage rate down. We do understand the tax burden that running a city at this time imposed upon many of our residents and businesses. But we are on our way out of financial recovery. And one of the things we are doing is to be prudent with our finances, but at the same time, trying to lower the impact on our residents and our business owners here in the city. So we are taking the steps to reduce this millage rate, and this is one of the steps to try and make that happen according to our 5-year recovery plan. So thank you everyone for this. And with that, Madam Clerk.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Commissioner Bass,
Yes.
Mayor Pike,
Yes.
motion passes 3-0, first reading.
Madam Attorney, 5B.
Wanted to acknowledge Commissioner Taylor coming
Yeah.
in.
No, Ms. Taylor has arrived.
An ordinance of the City Commission of the City of Opa-locka, Florida, approving and adopting the city's general proprietary and special funds budget for the fiscal year 2021 through 2022, commencing October 1, 2021 through September 30th, 2022, providing for the expenditure of funds established by the budget, authorizing the city manager to make certain actions, providing for appropriation of all budget expenditures, providing for fees consistent with appropriation and amendment, providing for adoption of representations, providing for conflict and repealer, providing for severability, providing for an effective date. This is sponsored by the city manager.
All right, also like to acknowledge Vice Mayor Williams. And with that, public hearing is open for item 5B. Do we have anyone online? All right, public hearing is closed. Do I have a motion?
Move it.
Moved by Commissioner Davis,
Second.
second by Commissioner Bass. Mr. Manager, would you introduce this item?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. This is to present the first reading and for public hearing, the comprehensive budget for the city of Opa-locka. We're doing something a little bit different this year. Each director will be presenting their own budgets. Mr. Anthony will provide an overview with every department providing a briefing on their budgets, their accomplishments, and their goals for the upcoming year. So it's going to be a little lengthy, but I ask for everybody's patience as we move through this and move forward from there. At this point, I give the floor to Mr. Anderson.
Thank you. Bob Anderson again, Budget Administrator. Good evening again. First slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. The agenda we're going to do tonight, as the manager said, First, I just very quickly got to remind you of the schedule. And next thing I want to remind you, we're going to pull together all of what I've identified as commission priorities. They are going to be presented by each of the department heads and other presenters during the presentation. But they will be, when they're presented during the department presentations, they're going to be wrapped up in a lot of other information. So I just wanted to use this as an overview to remind you of what you're going to be able to see tonight. Then I'm going to proceed to the overview at the fund level, just to give you some summary numbers. Then each department will present their own particular budgets. What is not going to be addressed tonight, first off, will be the ARPA funding, which is $8 million. That will be presented in a workshop in October to ensure that we properly identify the commission priorities. The other thing that's not going to be discussed tonight is going to be the CRA. The state has passed a series of legislation in the last year, so it's very clear the CRA is meant to be a separate entity. It has its own board, and therefore the CRA board will review the CRA budget next week. So that will not be addressed tonight. Next slide, please.
What did you say? You say two things weren't going to be addressed tonight?
Yes, sir. The first thing not to be addressed will be the $8 million. We have not integrated $8 million of ARPA funding into this budget at this time. Decisions have to be made as to how to prioritize it, where the money is going to be spent. If not, grants are also available. So we'll come back for a workshop in, I believe it's intended to be in October. And the second thing was CRA is really meant to be treated as a separate entity and will not be addressed tonight.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, very quickly, just to remind you, we almost through this long trail of the budget, where it's now September 15th for the first hearing. The second hearing is scheduled for the 22nd. If the budget, if the commission does decide that it is appropriate to change the budget, one of two things will happen. Either if the budget's changed at this time through the second hearing, then the budget will be submitted back to the state for a review and would be returned to the city no later than October 15th. The second alternative is if there are changes that are deemed to be desirable, they can be held off. The budget can be adopted as currently structured, and then a budget amendment submitted in October. If that is A, if it's decided the budget should be modified, and B, that option is selected by doing the budget amendment rather than changing at this point, it would allow the city to proceed with the current budget. It would also make it easier for the state because rather than reviewing the entire budget, they would only look at the budget amendment. Next, please. Sorry, here we go. As I said at the outset, one of the things I'd just like to share with you very quickly is what were deemed to be the priorities. We started with 4, but over various meetings and so forth, it did tend to expand. So these are the things that I have presently identified as commission priorities. And I'm going to take a look at each of these very quickly, not because they're meant to convey full information by themselves, but just to remind you that you will see them in the various departmental presentations. Next, please. Priorities was, first priority was finance, including structure of the department, completion of audits in the Republic, and the recovery plan. The budget does provide for a full staff of 8 people starting October 1st. Also, just as overlap 9 months of consultant time. I would add that the finance director interviews continue, and to a certain extent, they appear encouraging. Policy and procedures have been implemented, more in development. Staff is receiving on-job training. The audits are targeted to be completed by June of next year, which would be right on target with what's normally allowed for completion of the various audits. 5-year recovery plan has been accepted, as you know, last August. That date is wrong. It should be August 2020. I apologize. And I'm currently analyzing to see how the FY22 budget lines up with it. I can tell you in many ways, we are much better than what was in the 5-year plan, certainly in terms of revenue production for the general fund. But that piece work still has to be done. Unless there's any question, we'll move on. Slide, please. Next priority is the status of the utility delinquencies. It's on hold basically until legal issues have been resolved. The budget does allow for 2 extra people to come aboard at such time that work is allowed to begin again. And I would add, depending on how the settlement goes, if it involves a lot of claim reconciliation, probably have to go beyond the 2 people who we're bringing aboard. Next, please. Infrastructure, you're about to have a stormwater master plan. You've got grant applications in for a couple projects within stormwater. Gloria Gardens flooding has been mitigated. Cairo Lane's about to begin, or begin as of the second quarter, I should say. Your increases, your street sweeping has gone from 3 days a week to 5 days a week, and your drainage system is being maintained by a vendor. So that's the current status. You'll get a lot more detail from the Public Works Director. Next, please. The DERM moratorium, you've had a series of basins that have been relined to cut down on I&I. Had to go through a test last November to demonstrate that there really was tight. It was a tight system. The pumps ran more than they should. Unfortunately, due to very heavy rains last November, consequently failed. There's work underway to further tighten up the system. It's targeted to be completed, no later than November of this year. And just as a side point, it should be, in case everybody's not aware of it, Durham is so impressed with what the county, what the city has done, that they had the Public Works Director present all the work to basically a meeting that involved all the cities within the county. Next, please. Infrastructure, road and streets. Between FY21, FY22, we're talking about $2.7 million investment. By the end of FY22, you're going to have 26 lane miles completed out of 95 lane miles. We're using lane miles concept because some roads are wider than others, so using lane miles rather than miles of roads. Sidewalks, going to have 58 sidewalk miles completed out of 70 by the end of this, by the end of the FY22 budget. Beyond that, talking about a slower pace because you're going to get very heavily involved in stormwater and no sense of redoing your streets if you're going to have to tear them up again. And just as part of one of the priorities was to document, ensure that this city was made, or I'm sorry, the community was made aware of what was of the progress that's being achieved, and documentation has been provided for most of these projects. Next, please. Operational audit is coming to a conclusion. I was told as of today, the only person who's going to be on site going forward is going to be the audit coordinator. It really created a major workload problem for staff once the audit began at the end of August. I'm sorry, at the end of March. Quite literally, there were several of us for many weeks in April and May were working 100-hour weeks, which translates to 14-hour days, 7 days a week. So message there is it was put a very tough burden on the city at the time. Is also trying to do a city financial audit and budget development. And unfortunately, I think everything suffered a little bit. Next, please. You'll see tonight public safety. The police chief will give you a very good presentation demonstrating improvements in essentially all these categories. Next, please. Beautification. It is a work in progress. All of these various items are inherent in the budget. Some, I will admit, are not fully funded. Pressure cleaning, for example, is not fully funded. Illegal dumping, if I may just digress for a second, because I'm not sure that everybody's aware of the environment in which we're working. As everybody knows, the county is responsible for collecting illegal dumping in both the residential area and the commercial area. In the residential area, the county would maintain that they will pick it up within 22 hours of being notified of it. We need some measures to verify they're doing their job. In the commercial side, anytime that illegal dumping occurs in the roadways in front of commercial properties, the county has to be notified. They come out and investigate. may take a day or three. Then they will identify who is responsible for it, or if not identifying who is responsible for it, then they will inform the property owner adjacent to the dumping that he or she is responsible for it. They then give that property owner 7 days to clean that up. And if at the end of 7 days, it's not cleaned up, then they will come back and clean it up. The message on that is from the time you first see illegal dumping on a commercial right of way, that can sit there for 2 full weeks before it finally goes away. So I know there's a lot of frustration about the fact this doesn't seem to, never seems to go away, but that is, it's built into the system we're using right now. So I just want to make you aware, because I think there's a sense that every time we see illegal dumping, it should be picked up the next day. And it's more complicated than that. Thank you. So again, these are all things that are inherent in the various department presentations you'll see, and I'm not going to go through them unless there's any questions. Next, please. Parks and Recreation, that was one of your priorities. And I think this list here, and again, this will be presented by the Parks and Rec Director and possibly the Assistant Director, identifies essentially every item that was identified during your deliberations as to what you want to see in Parks and Recreation. Next, please. Human Resources, evaluation timelines have been brought into compliance. There's approved accountability and discipline policies in place. As you'll see in the budget, there's increased emphasis on training and development. They've increased the number of sources that they reach out to in the recruiting process. Ethics training has been in place for a couple of years now, even though it was listed as an objective within or priority. And they're, as you'll see tonight, they are going to acquire new software, which is going to move them into a paperless mode of operation. Next slide, please. So that very quickly, it's enough just to make you aware that within the budget, we have certainly tried to address as many commission priorities as we could, and these are subjects you're going to see tonight. Having said that, we're now going to go in very quickly, look at a financial overview at a high level, and then we'll go back, do it at the department level. Next slide, please. I call this a fun primer because we use terminology that we're comfortable with. You all don't use it maybe once or twice a year. And what I'm trying to make sure is that when we make reference to certain things, that you know what we're talking about, so I'm not wasting your time. What we're trying to show here is the city has 10 funds. Fund is basically set up to match revenues and expenses to ensure that they're kept in line. I've got them color coded, and I'll explain why in a moment. The little stars out to the left of 3 of the funds, general fund, water, and stormwater, is one we're going to look at in a little more detail. They're your primary funds, but to start from the top, general fund is obviously your primary fund. It really covers essentially nearly all the city operations. It covers commission, covers city manager, covers legal, finance, HR, and so forth. That's your primary source of revenue. Immediately beneath it, there's something called a debt service fund. That fund is, the city has some borrowing in place. City receives a certain amount of revenue, which becomes pledge revenue. A portion of that's applied to the debt. The remainder is then transferred out to the general fund. In this case, you can see for the budget, we're anticipating receiving $3.9 million of revenue, although it's expense here. 1.2 will be used to cover current year debt service, and the other 2.7 will be transferred out to the general fund. The next 2 items are highlighted, hopefully in light blue. I'm not sure that it came out quite. These are where you do your investments, capital investments, I should say, for everything but the capital investment that occurs in water, sewer, and sewer fund, water, sewer, and stormwater fund. Next fund down beneath that is the town center fund. That's been a little fund that's been carved out to match the revenue that the town center fund realizes from rental income versus expenditures. Beneath that's a fund called the Special Law Fund that is funded by monies received from criminal seizures, and it's used for various police projects. The next 2 funds are called internal service funds. One's risk management, one's information technology, internal service fund. Each of these funds provided service to the rest of the city. It has no external source of revenue. That's why it's called an internal service fund. And each of the other funds pays for whatever expenses are incurred by these two funds. The last two funds that I'm going to talk to, actually the last 2 out of 3, water, sewer, and your stormwater funds. Just these are known as enterprise funds. They're intended to be operated on a business-like basis. They charge the community for services provided, which are meant to be adequate enough to cover both their operating costs and their investment costs. The last one, which is beneath the line, and it's along the line of what I mentioned before, but it's here just for completeness, CRA. It's not really anymore really considered to be part of the city total in terms of budgeting and so forth. And CRA, I think everybody's familiar with, so I won't waste your time with that. Are there any questions on this? This is meant to be definitional. So if there are any questions, please ask now so that you'll have some idea what I'm talking about as I go forward. Okay, good. Next slide, please. Very high level. As I said on the prior chart, we're going to really be focused primarily at this point on 3 funds: the general fund, the water sewer fund, and also the stormwater fund. General fund, as I've shared with you during our July meetings, very healthy. One of the requirements of a general fund is to have adequate reserves. In our case, it's around $3.3 million. That's a GFOA standard, Government Finance Officers Association standard. We, as you'll see at the end of FY21, expectation is to be significantly above that number. FY22, we will recommend the use of some portion of that for one-time expenditures. Water sewer fund, as I shared with you before, really, if you'll excuse the pun, is illiquid. It's not covering its operating expenses right now because of the debt service and legal expenses it's incurring, and is really going to require some damage control, and we'll go through what's required there. The third one is stormwater fund, with the placement of the stormwater fees onto the property tax for the first time the fund is realizing the amount of revenue it should be receiving each year, and is now generating about $800,000-900,000 a year to be applied against various investments. Next, please. The points that I would ask you to take away from this, again, this is meant to be a summary chart. You've seen it before. In fact, let me try the pointer. This is what I was talking about before. We anticipate, based on everything I've been able to see so far, a $6.6 million surplus of funding over expenditures this year. It takes what was provided at the end of the FY19 audit as a closing balance for the general fund then, or an opening balance for it in FY20, negative $2.2 million, takes it up to $4.4 million. In FY21, the forecast right now looks like just a shade under another $2 million, which will take fund balance up into the neighborhood of $6.3 million. And then, as I mentioned before, and we'll discuss a little bit, recommending using $2.2 million of that fund balance, which would take it down to $4.1 million, which again is a very healthy excess over the requirement of 3.3. So, reminder on use of fund balance: the intent of fund balance is it's intended for use, available for use in general for one-time things, is never meant to be used for ongoing operations. Next, please. Okay. In the general fund revenue, just going to focus on a couple key items. You can see, and as I mentioned before in discussing the millage rate, we're talking about $11.2 million of property tax. And the real driver in the FY21 was the grant money received under the County CARES Act program, $3.8 million. And not surprisingly, we don't see that in FY22 at this time. Next slide, please. Millage rate, we've already talked about it. This is a little bit of the metrics on it. Again, it's down 0.1500 mils from FY21. And just a reminder, just as a fun fact, 1/10 of a mil is equal to about $116,000 this year. And we've already discussed the rollback rate. rollback rate is a term you may not be familiar with. I will put on my pedagogical hat for very briefly. Rollback rate is part of the trim process. And what it says is when you go on to the next year, what millage rate would have provided the same amount of revenue that was provided in the prior year by the property tax. When the property tax goes up, when the base goes up, then the millage rate would be less than that. So the 9.2418 that you see there would in theory produce, with the property tax base we're looking at for next year, would have produced the same amount of property tax revenues this year. Next, please. Put this together, I think you'll find it educational. What I've done is I've broken your property tax base into 4 categories. The top category is your homestead taxable, where you actually have homestead property paying property tax. Not all homestead property does pay property tax. You can see that it is 10% of the mix of your property tax base for FY22. The next one is where it really gets interesting. Part of trim legislation says that no property that is continue to be owned by the same property owner can go up more than 10% in taxable value from one year to the next. And that becomes very interesting as follows. You can see that within your property tax base, that is, again, the numbers are in billions, so that's really $785 million. The interesting part of that is the taxable value is only $563 million. If that 10% cap was not in place, this number would be the same as that, which would be another $200 million of property tax and another couple million, property tax base, and which would translate into another couple $1 million of property tax this year. What I'm explaining to you is this is really like a coiled compressed spring that is going to try to keep catching up to market value, and I'll show you the impact of that in a moment. The next portion of your property tax base is non-taxable. It's 20% of the total, and as the name implies, we get nothing from it, so it's just part of the tax base. Has no value. It's part of the total property base, has no taxable value. Then there's an all else category, and we'll look at that in more detail. What does that all translate to at the end of FY21? Your property tax base for taxation purposes was slightly under $1 billion. Congratulations, for the first time, it now exceeds $1 billion. And you can see the growth essentially came from the category we spent some time on, where 510,000 of your taxable value, your total growth of 82 million, 51 million of it came out of that category we talked about a moment ago. The property tax base, that of 82 million is about an 8.4% improvement in your property tax base, which is excellent. Next slide, please. The reason I dragged you through this, I want to share for you the first look at what FY23 is going to look like. As I said, going back to this category, oh, maybe I did that. I apologize if I did. Can you go back? Okay, thank you very much. I said that this tax base was going to grow by 10%. That means you're going to get, the city's going to get another $56 million of taxes growth there. And again, it still won't have caught up. It's like a compacted spring that is just ready to grow. The other things that come out of this is we have this all else category. I don't know what that's going to be. I've put a scientific guess into it, called it 5%. Total out of that is that you get about an $80 million improvement in your tax base. What I have not mentioned so far is your growth in your tax base this year in terms of new additions was less than $1 million, which is very disappointing. Your building permits this year were over $1 million, which means there's an awful lot in the pipeline. So this number does not include new additions that we expect to see next year. This is rather long-winded, but basically what it says is the growth next year is probably going to be in the neighborhood of this year, which tells you two things. It's going to produce another, if you keep the same millage rate, it's going to produce another $700,000 of property tax revenue, which 200,000 will go to the CRA, 500,000 will go to the general fund. Conversely, it could provide you wiggle room in terms of certainly taking the millage rate down further. And again, this is just a heads up, absolutely nothing to do tonight. I just want to give you some idea of what the city's future looks like. Next, please. Where is the money being spent within the general fund proposed budget? Not surprisingly, the majority of the money proposed to be spent is going to be in compensation. We have a very large contingency to address former Commissioner Kelly's point. You have 2 unions that are in contract negotiations right now. The compensation that has been brought in on the compensation line is the current compensation, current rates that are in effect. There is room in this number to make adjustments once those 2 contracts come to closure. Also included there is 1.1 million, which is required by the code. 2 other things. Oh, I'm sorry, I did not point out something before. Can I get you to go back? Can I get you back? Keep going back. One point I failed to make. On the what I call the primer, the general fund primer, or the fund primer. Keep going back, please. Back. One more. Keep going. Sorry. And one more. I apologize. Okay. What I failed to say is just because you're going to see the term transferred out, and we will announce we have a $54 million budget, but 9.1 million of that is just money that's being moved to another fund where in fact will be spent. For example, within the general fund transfer out, there's 400,000 that goes to the safe neighborhood, which then shows up in this expenditure here. So I don't like to use the term, but it's really double counting. Cash out the door under this budget would be 45 million. It will be advertised as a $54 million budget. Is that concept, everybody comfortable with that? Because it's kind of a different way to do an accounting, but this is what we're required to do. Seeing none. Can I go back to where I had you before? I apologize for doing that. So big expenditures here again are the transfers out, 1.1 million, and to the Information Tech Internal Services Fund, and 2.4 million to the Risk Management Internal Service Fund. In both cases, that's about 75% of the total budget of each of those 2 internal service funds. So that's basically from 30,000 feet up where the money's being spent in the general fund. You will see within each of the department presentations, you'll see how that's being spent within their various departments. Next slide, please. This is another way of just kind of looking where the primary expenditures are going to be, or where I should say where the growth is going to be over the FY21 original budget. You can see city manager, which is first and foremost the fact of additional staffing, which I'll discuss in a minute. Non-department, I'll discuss that in a moment. All the other divisions, all the other departments will present their own version of this so that you really get inside the details. But you can see the primary growth, as I alluded to in reading the required statement that I was required to, is how it's going to be used. First and foremost, the increase is going to be in the policing, and then secondarily within Parks and Recreation. Next slide, please. This is a chart you've seen before, and it just shows the headcount growth of 18. I think it says 18. Apologies for my eyes. And then secondarily, Parks and Recreation has recognized that most Parks and Recreation departments make very extensive use of part-time people, and they've incorporated that in their budget, as I'll explain to you. Next slide, please. I'm going to go through 3 divisions, City Commission, City Manager, and also the General Fund non-department. The only reason these are highlighted are because they were changed based on the July meetings. We did take the allowances back up to what is authorized within the code, which in total is $12,000. We did break apart the travel budgets for each of the commissioners, and we did put $5,000 in there to address the scholarship program. So unless there's any question on that, I'll move on to the next one. Next slide, please. City manager, as I said, there is growth in the primary growth is in compensation. That is involved in bringing a legislative aid in from another department. Also 2 part-time employees, which in total add up to about 180,000 of the total increase there. Other than that, travel as necessary. A lot of memberships that a city manager has to be involved with. You can see what the number is for this year, and it's basically a continuation into next year. And the last one is just for employee development. I think the forecast says $8,000 at the moment. It looks like it's going to be 4,000, but it really provides a lot of leeway for further employee development. So unless there's any questions on that, move on to the next one. Next slide, please. Non-department, the big items in there. Again, the function of the non-department is for expenses that really don't relate to any one given department. And so we very creatively call them non-department. Big numbers in there are other professional expenses, and what you've got buried in there, that number right there, you've got a little over 100,000 for your public relations outsourced with Hip Rockstar. You've got another $25,000 in there to get internal audit services. You've got $50,000 in there for a strategic plan facilitator. And then you've got another $25,000 in there for your grant writer services. Coming down to the big numbers down below, this is what we pay for the use of the 8 red light cameras that we have about the city right now. As you may remember from your revenue, that is producing about $1.2 million revenue right now. And then down beneath it, we have the transfer out that we just talked about a moment ago. Next slide, please. The message to take away on the water sewer fund is right here, the amount of fund balance we're using. Forecast says 1.2 here, and then another 2 million here. As I mentioned before, we are not covering operating expenses with the costs that have to be that are included in the term operating expense at this point. Next slide, please. Again, this just highlights the issue. Against that $10 million of revenue that we receive, we pay the county between what we pay for buying water, for processing wastewater, and also for their billing fees. It's going to be in the neighborhood of $4.6 million next year. In the budget next year is another $400,000 for legal services for related to the billing legal issue. As I also mentioned, debt service is a very large burden on this fund right now, and you can see a large contingency, which in part is available to cover the enterprise fund portion of any labor negotiations, and also for anything that may arise for other things such as legal. So between those, the fund is just not able to cover its costs at this point. Next slide, please. You saw this before, just repeating what I said a moment ago. The primary thrust at this point is to work with the county, or the recommended approach at this point is to work with the county and to a lesser extent the state, and convert the current debt payment schedules into interest only for 2 years. And then after that to go to an extended one so that we allow the water sewer fund to recover. So that is the recommended primary direction. An option that I mentioned before, but it's a secondary option because in the last 5 years, there has been a very significant increase, certainly in what we pay the county for processing wastewater, and to a lesser extent for what we pay for buying water, that in a normal environment, a rate increase might be appropriate. This recommendation was just brought for discussion purposes, would be for commercial accounts only, 3% water, 9% sewer. That would produce another $300,000 annually. Again, that has a secondary priority at this point. Unless there are any questions, that we'll go on to a few remaining charts. Next, please. The things that I would like you to take away from this one is A, it's a healthy fund. The closing balance at the end of FY '20 is believed to be in the range of $2.1 million. It has a reserve requirement somewhere around $200,000. So there's a lot of money in there that's really intended to be used for other reasons above and beyond what's required for an adequate reserve. You can see, well, you can't see on this page, but you can see in FY '21, we have proposed and we're on the road to using 1.4 million of that fund balance. And then again in FY '22, we're proposing to use another $900,000. It does drive the fund balance negatively at that point in time, but I'll remind you within the 2-3 months after that, the fund's going to receive another $1.9 million off the property tax assessment. So that's just a temporary problem, which is going to be totally corrected in FY '23. So it's to take care of a couple of things that need to be taken care of and does not present a long-term problem by any stretch of imagination. Next slide, please. And again, the primary purpose of this fund is to invest in capital. And you can see there, everything else is secondary in nature. Next, please. Okay, that completes my presentation for the moment. I will certainly ready to take any questions you might have at this point. Otherwise, we'll move on to the department presentations.
Thank you. Any other questions or comments for Mr. Anderson? Commissioner Davis.
Thank you. I have one question. I think it was relative to the new construction that Mr. Anathan spoke upon, the 700,000, which was realized during this fiscal year. I'm trying to understand, I guess, what you were saying, Mr. Anathan, about the amounts and I guess the potential of taking down the millage, if I'm hearing you correctly, to potentially encourage new development. Was that what you were recommending?
I apologize for not making that clear. Possibly if I can get that presentation back up for a moment, please. Sorry to do that to you.
Thank you.
And it's probably about, I'd say maybe chart number 11, 12, possibly. Oh, wait a minute. Bless your heart, you're right there right now. 99%, that was fine. I'm sorry, I misled you on that. Please come back. What I was trying to convey, and apparently did not do as good a job as I had hoped. Your property tax base grows 99% from market forces. Then you get a little adder each year from the new construction. In the $82 million of growth that we saw for FY '21, only 700,000 of it was related to property that has been improved or was a hole in the ground and is now a occupied facility. Point I made on top of that is that your building permits for FY '21 are going to be in excess of $1 million. So with $1 million of building permits, something's going on out there that should lend itself to a bigger number in FY '22 or maybe FY '23. Point I was trying to make here is, and if I'm repeating myself and you're already familiar, please stop me, that when you look at FY '23, and you look at this category that we've highlighted in yellow, it is constrained to grow by no more than 10% a year. So it went into it's going into next year with a property tax base of 560 million. It really like to get up to market value, but it can't because of trim requirements. So it's going to grow 10%. And oh, by the way, if any of that property gets sold, then the 10% cap goes away and you get even more out of the deal. What I was trying to point out is it looks like with some uncertainty about this number here, the 5% number, that the growth in the property tax base is going to be somewhat analogous to what we had this year. And oh, by the way, if you start to put new ads into that number, which is not there, another 4 or 5 million, then the 80 million would go to 85 million or something like that. With that level, which is very comparable to what you see this year, you can see that number right here. Growth was 82 million. It says all things being equal, if you don't change your millage rate, it's going to produce another $700,000 of new property tax revenue. Of that, the CRA is going to get somewhat less than 200,000, and that would leave 500 and change for the general fund. But as you did this year, it will give you the option, if you so choose, to use some portion of that in terms of a millage rate reduction, which is, say, instead of 500 and change for the general fund, be a lesser number for the general fund, but a reduction in the millage rate. That clarify, hopefully?
Yes.
Perfect.
So the goal would be to take it down to bring in more revenue, in other words. So, because the 700,000, when I looked at the property tax report, once the certified values came in, I noticed that the 700,000 that, we were able to achieve this year was slightly lower when we look at surrounding cities, i.e. Miami Gardens, North Miami, which tend to linger in the millions. So I guess what I wanted to hear was, how lowering the millage rate would either increase that number or the larger part of, where we get our ad valorem taxes.
The millage rate and new builds are really not coupled. It really is a function of all the building permits that are going out the door now, which is totally oblivious to whatever might go on with millage rate. And as I said, with $1 million plus in building permits, something's going on out there that should be an adder. So I would hope, if not in the what we get for FY23, doesn't show several $1 million. But again, your real growth comes out of market forces. That's kind of a cherry on top of it.
And the county makes those forecasts, correct?
No.
New construction, or we?
Oh, no,
forecast
that's strictly, again, I mean, the number that's in the county numbers is certainly what they've gotten from all the data they've collected. All I'm doing is taking a wild guess, saying, boy, if I'm putting out $1 million a permit, there's something big out there that's going to materialize in the property tax space, hopefully real soon, but if not real soon, certainly within 2 years.
Got it. And that's relative to the finding and the audit with those funds and within the building department and the license, the building licenses versus the actual revenue that was received from
the operational audit, I think, was more concerned about the way the department was functioning, not necessarily the amount of revenue it was getting. I mean, to a certain extent, the revenue that comes in is not driven by the city. We process it. It's driven to the city to the extent we create an attractive city.
Right.
But other than that, it's a developer who says, I've got money. Operational audit, I think, was more concerned about the processes that were being used there.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Anderson.
Yes, sir.
Thank you, Ms. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor,
Vice Mayor.
two things, quick question. Well, maybe it's not a question. I noticed in our booklet on page 48, it states that $15,000 goes to professional development for the city manager's office staff. I'm not sure if this was already, or is this something that we're going to discuss? I don't know if you had discussed this already. So my question, and I don't know if that's you, Mr. Anthony, or through the manager's office, is this all staff of the city, or is this just staff of the city manager's office? And my next question is, have this money been spent this year on professional development, or is this just a projection of professional development?
Thank you, through Mayor. Madam Vice Mayor, that is a projection. That is not monies that have been spent for professional development. And that is for all employees of the city manager's office. So in any of the budgets where you see anything that says professional development and it's departmental, that's all employees that are assigned to that individual department, just for clarification purposes.
Okay, so
Yep.
okay.
I was just going to say I think you added something about this too as well. The forecast was $8,000. 4,000 will be spent this year, because I think that was part of your question.
Yes. And I think so. Where I am with that is if the manager's office is a small staff, are the larger staffs receiving as much or if not more in professional? Because quite frankly, that is an issue here in Opa-locka with the staff, is the lack of professional development. I think people genuinely want it, but so I'm just wondering, are we providing that to all departments?
Yes, so that's an excellent question. Actually, and this actually has been a conversation incorporated within the union negotiations for both police and ASME as far as increasing professional development opportunities. Specifically, citywide professional development initiatives are typically budgeted within the HR department, and individualized professional developments, for example, building and licensing and other departments that have more specialized training, those trainings are built in within the individual departments. So, for example, city manager training, ICMA, and various other training opportunities that are city manager office specific or within or for employees within the manager's office are kind of coupled there. But the holistic approach of citywide professional development is housed within the HR silo, and there's a lot of training available that has been offered, free training that the HR department has offered employees. And we were trying to find a way within union negotiations to kind of stimulate employees to do more free training and participate more in the training opportunities that are available. I'm sorry for that huge response, but I think it required somewhat of a comprehensive answer.
Okay. And then back in July, I had a question about the increase in salaries. I know we briefly talked about it, but what I would like to see, because I'm seeing some increases and then decreases and different things going on throughout different departments. And I guess when each department had discussed, I would like to see a breakdown as who will be provided those increases. I know that it was stated because of the financial oversight, some of the decrease happened there. However, I would like to see at least a 3-year history of those salaries to see who are getting those increases and who's not.
No, understood.
If I can be provided with that information.
Sure, that's not a problem. Mr. Anthony, do you have a breakdown per like FTE?
I think the question was by employees. We understood the
It
question.
was by employee.
We do have that
Because
data.
certain employees, I believe in July, we saw that were getting increases significant too, 10 and 20,000. However, there were some that weren't. So I would like to see who are those employees that are getting from fiscal year 2020 or 2019-20 as opposed to fiscal year 22. What, those huge jumps. Thank you.
Yeah, if I may, just very quick, there are only 2 promotions built into the current budget, going from FY21 to FY22. I now understand you want to go back to FY20. It's doable. We can do it employee by employee. Most part, there's really not been much in the way of increases. I'm sorry, I'm dragging out too much, but there were a couple situations at the end of FY20, as the manager discussed before. There were 3 people who had their compensation reduced because of the financial emergency. In fact, there were a lot of people, most of them had been brought back prior to FY20. These 3, for whatever reason, hadn't. Manager made good on those. So in those 3 departments, you will see a difference, at least in those particular employees. But again, when you look at salaries, it's also the number of people in there and so forth and so on. So it's, as I say, it's complicated, but it's doable.
So I think what I'm hearing you say, Mr. Anathan, is everyone has been brought back to their comparable salary except those 3 employees. Is that what I'm hearing you say?
What I did
Everyone.
say in fiscal year 20, prior to 1 October 2020, there were 3 people who had not previously been brought back. And I don't know the history when they were brought back. I think it was much earlier, several years before that. The city manager looked at it and said, that's not equitable. And he brought those 3 employees back to their previous levels. as well.
Also, if I might add, first, last year was a very turbulent year. And as far as when we talk about increases, this commission approved a across-the-board increase to bring everybody that we're at a certain salary level to a level of salary. I believe it was $30,000 or $31,000. Okay. The only departments that I have control over as far as doing or any positions, as you may know, Vice Mayor, are exempt positions. So exempt positions, I can do salary moves based on the positions, promotions, and various different things like that. What I run into, and I would love to give all union employees raises, but the issue I run into is we're in the middle of union negotiations. So it's very difficult for me to do salary increases within the union ranks. And I know our union ranks are very frustrated right now because they have not received a raise in many, many, many years. And so we're moving towards the stride of getting there. We're actually close to hopefully concluding union negotiations, hopefully within the next 90 days. And you guys will get a proposed ratified contract to you all. So that's very, very that's a very kind of fragile situation. When we brought, just for the commission's note, when we brought those employees up to that mandated increase, the union employees, we actually got correspondence from the union threatening arbitration in that we did not bargain for those raises. So when the city, upon the passage of the budget, increased all those salaries, they said, hold on, thank you for the raises, but you didn't bargain for this. And we don't want you guys to consider these raises as a point of collective bargaining. So now we're in catch-22 where we cannot use that salary increase you did last year as part of collective bargaining. So I'm saying this because there's a broader picture here when we're talking about raises and increases. There are a lot of things I would love to do, but collective bargaining prohibits that. It's not the fault of the unions. It's not the fault of management. It's just the way collective bargaining goes. And so what I would like to see is equitability. Ex-Commissioner Kelly, ex-Mayor Kelly brought up a point of 3% increases for all employees in the city. Well, we've already looked at those projections last year of what those dollars would look like. And so the question is, we're in the middle of the union negotiations. We want to now look at a 3% increase. Now they understand that we do it now, that's on top of what they would get, what anybody would get in union increases. So there's a lot of moving pieces to the puzzle. If I would tell you, if we were not in the middle of collective bargaining negotiations, I'd be all for doing a 3% increase across the board because we're not in the middle of negotiations. So I know what the stability looks like. But to provide 3% increases or any increases on top of that while in negotiations is a slippery slope, you know, and it's one that compoundedly may create issues down the line. And what we want to do is not create those issues. And so I just want to kind of speak on that.
Any other questions?
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Teller?
so to the manager, you talked about the 3 employees whose salary was taken away. For the salary restoration, I guess, for lack of a better term, are those 3 employees a part of that union?
No.
So then why did we wait so late to give them back their salary?
So upon becoming manager, the issue was brought to my attention. On the issue being brought to my attention, I inquired with the state of Florida in regards to the matter. And we were able to show that every employee that was provided some type of reduction received their funds back. And there were some employees that did not receive a reduction at all in pay during specific periods of time. And so we felt in order to prevent any issues in the future, it would have been equitable and fair to restore those employees that were affected that were not restored. Why they weren't restored at a given period of time, I have no idea. I can't answer that question because I was not the manager at the time, so I didn't make those determinations and decisions. All I can tell you is what was brought to my attention and what we did to resolve it.
But some employees did receive restoration, but some,
Didn't, and mostly, we're mostly talking about non-union employees.
but the three employees that we speak of on today
We're non-union employees.
were non-union. So my question still remains, why didn't they get, when we restored the non-union employees prior to the budget, why weren't they included in the pot?
I have no idea.
This is
Commissioner.
before you or,
It's before my time.
okay.
All right. Few quick questions. I was looking at this budget compared to our 5-year recovery plan. And I see that our revenues that were expected for this year is about 35 million. And here in this operating budget is 34 million. How did that come about? Like in terms of why is our revenues lower than projected in the 5-year recovery plan?
As that is the analysis I was referring to, it's a work in progress at this point. I am quite sure that the general fund revenue is head and shoulders above what was in the 5-year plan. The fund balance for the general fund, instead of being 6.3, let's say at the end of FY21, was probably about 2 point something or other. So in terms of restoring the financial integrity of the general fund, we are head and shoulders above what was in the 5-year plan. I don't have the details yet. That's a piece of work that I have to get to still.
Okay, so I'm just trying to, because I understand with the fund balance, we generate a surplus and that surplus can be used to assist us. But I'm looking at our revenues in terms of our set expenses like salaries and operating expenses.
Yeah.
And we see a significant increase, as you said, majority of the increases due to compensation. And with those salaries, that means that's going to continue year after year. Unless we make significant changes to cut certain departments and services, those salaries are going to grow. And in looking at the 5-year recovery plan and this budget, our revenues is lower than what's projected. However, our expenditures in terms of salaries and operating expenses significantly more than what we projected in FY22. Our current projections are similar to what we projected in FY 2025 for this year. So could you help me understand and help us understand, like, how does that work? Because if our expenses is growing faster than our revenues that we have, excluding the money that may come in other areas for special projects, wouldn't that eventually take away from our fund balance significantly over time?
What I can talk to with great certainty is the general fund. In FY22, we are proposing to use fund balance for one-time things that you don't have to do. So what that says is, without using that fund balance and without doing the one-time things, we are covering the compensation that's built in at the higher staffing levels that you mentioned a moment ago. So that is a sustainable relationship. I can't talk to the other, I will flat out tell you the water sewer fund's in trouble. I think you're looking at the total and I just don't have those details worked out at this point. You're making reference to 35 and 34 million. And I don't have the context of those numbers at the moment. Again, it's a piece of work that I owe you, but it's unfortunately not yet done.
What do you mean you don't have those numbers yet? Could you explain that a little more?
Yes, sir. You really have to look through it, every piece of each of the funds and find out what's changed in terms of your transfers, what's changed in your capital expenditures. And it's a reasonably complicated piece of work. I certainly have the details. I have not spent the time to try to piece it all together yet.
Okay. So yeah, my base concern is that it looks like our salaries and operating expenses is growing at a much more significant rate than our ad valorem taxes, which lays a foundation for this government's budget and operating. And afraid of us having such high salaries, which is the reason why we got into this financial recovery as part of our expenses going over our revenues. So I would like clarity on how this budget and future budgets will rectify that, and how we're going to get back in alignment with our 5-year recovery plan, or make modifications to the 5-year recovery plan and give us a more clear picture of where we are now.
Yes, sir.
All right. Any other questions, comments? All right, you may proceed.
Okay, who do we have in the lineup, Mr. Anthony? First Department?
As was on the last slide, first presentation will be city clerk, followed by HR risk management, finance, utility billing, and I will prompt beyond that point.
Thank you. Good afternoon, Mayor, Vice Mayor, and Commissioners. I will be presenting the budget for the City Clerk's Office for fiscal year 2022. First slide, please. So our mission in the Clerk's Office is to assist the City Commission in accomplishing the legislative process while providing quality customer service and performing administrative functions for the residents, staff, and constituents in an efficient, courteous, and professional manner. Next slide, please. Some of our current year accomplishments in the Clerk's Office include maintain the City Clerk's webpage with the most updated information to continue promoting transparency and easy access to public records. Monitor and process the responses to public records requests, ensuring compliance with the state of Florida's public records laws. Transcribe commission meeting minutes, process lobbyist registrations, attended training for professional development, register elected officials for training at the Florida League of Cities Institute for Elected Municipal Officials, monitor changes in laws and regulations that impact public records, elections, and legal notices. Efficiently prepared public meeting agendas and minutes, including legal advertising, coordinated and attended commission meetings, workshops, and special meetings. Supervise the City of Opa-locka 2020 municipal election to include the preparing of election packages, publication of legal election notices, and qualified 8 candidates for 2 commission seats. And for this current fiscal year, so far we've had 20 regular commission meetings, 12 workshops, 7 special commission meetings, and by the end of September, we'll have 2 budget hearings as well. Next slide, please. For fiscal year 2022 objectives for the Clerk's Office, researching records management programs for the City of Opa-locka, continue providing access to the city official records and legislative documents through as many different mediums as possible, find new ways to utilize technology and best business practices to provide effective and efficient service to the public and the City Commission, explore further expansion of services and options available to the public through the City Clerk's webpage, Schedule annual public records training in coordination with the Human Resources Department for all city employees. Implement a system for the electronic filing of campaign finance reports. Next slide, please. The next slide is the organizational chart for the city clerk's office. So it includes me and my 3 staff members, the assistant city clerk, receptionist, and executive assistant to the mayor and city commission. Next slide, please. This slide shows the salaries for the employees in the clerk's office. Salaries executive is for the city clerk, and you'll see salaries regular, which include the 3 positions, assistant city clerk, executive assistant to the mayor and city commission, and the receptionist. And it also includes the numbers for the benefits for those positions. Next slide, please. For these line items, I will go through each line item. Other professional services. This line item includes the codification of ordinances that are adopted by the city commission and have to be codified in the city code. It also includes fees for counting recording fees for documents that need to be recorded through Miami-Dade County Clerk of Courts. Travel line item is to travel for training, postage and freight. That includes any type of postage for mailings through the clerk's office. Rentals and leases. This is for the copier and the postage machine, monthly rental fees, that's in the clerk's office. Legal advertising, that includes all legal ads that we have to submit pursuant to Florida state statute. Software licensing, we're looking into getting some public record software, and that's included in the software licensing line item. Publications and memberships, that's for the several clerks association that me and my staff members are part of. Education costs, that's to attend training for the clerk and her staff. Furniture, we have $500 in the event that we do need some furniture in the clerk's office. And computer costs, we will be getting 2 new computers for 2 of the staff members in the clerk's office. And at this time, I have nothing further. If you have any questions.
Commissioner Bass?
I have a quick question. I know I have been gone for a minute, so I just need some clarification on it doesn't have a page number, the organizational chart.
Yes.
I'm looking at it and I see, of course, the assistant clerk, the receptionist, and executive assistant. I need some clarification on that because I thought we had a legislative aide.
So the legislative aid is gonna be under the manager's office. And now our office will have an executive assistant to the mayor and city commission.
Okay, let me ask an elementary question. What is the job description between both of them?
Well, the executive assistant to the mayor and city commission does more administrative work, clerical work. And the legislative aid, actually, they do anything that has to do with the legislative process. They keep the commission informed. They do research, a lot of research on items, like any legislation items that the commission may want to sponsor. They conduct that research and things of that nature.
So my question would be, why would, I don't know who to ask, why would it be so that the aide is in the city manager's office?
So
I'm sorry. If
Go ahead.
he's the aide to the commission and all of us work a 9 to 5 or even more, I depend on him. Like, you never know. And I need to have access to him when I need be. And I'm sure I must be speaking for the rest of us. I just don't have a good feel for the person that's aide to us to be in the mayor's office. That's not, maybe it's me.
Well, this request did come out of the manager's office, but historically in the clerk's office, there has been an executive secretary to the mayor and commission. This is the first time that we've had a legislative aide. So it's a new position that wasn't recently in the city of Opa-locka. It's always been an executive secretary to the mayor and commission.
Again, the job description still different. The legislative aide works for the commission, right? And the executive secretary. You understand where I'm coming from?
So the administrative portion that is normally required for assistant with the mayor and commission, to carry out their duties is still going to be handled through the clerk's office. So that portion, if you need to make appointments, need somebody to send emails on your behalf, things of that nature administratively, that position is still in the clerk's office. And like I said, the request came from the manager's office and, I didn't have any, I wasn't against it. So, it was asked in a public meeting if I agreed to it and I did say yes. So, at this point, I think it's already, basically the state already approved this budget. And this is just formal now to approve whatever is in the budget at this time. But the request came from the manager's office, so maybe he can shed light on
Sure,
the purpose for transferring that position.
sure. Thank you. So since I've been here, I've always been one that focused on process. And so anytime we would have a discussion in regards to legislation, who developed legislation, right? That's with any commission and any commission member. That task was always placed on the manager's office to develop legislation on behalf of commission members. And so the main goal and purpose of a legislative aid is to develop legislation, and to conduct research and develop the legislation. I felt that the position is better suited within the manager's office, since my office is the office responsible for developing legislation on behalf of the commissioners. If that role was within the clerk's office, and the clerk's office was responsible for developing legislation for commission members, this would not be a discussion. But because in several meetings and debates that we've had over almost 2 years I've been here, who's responsible in developing legislation on behalf of the members of the commission has always been the city manager's office. So I felt that it was prudent that the city manager's office had a legislative aid to assist in that process, because at this point, my executive assistant is currently developing legislation on behalf of members of the commission, and along with staff members, through various meetings that we have with members of the commission develop their legislation. By having a legislative aid, that puts a position within my office to work with commission members in developing their legislation, since my office is indeed responsible for that factor. And I had a lot of conversation with the city clerk in regards to the matter. And we looked at, really what each position did and what the roles and responsibilities were. And I felt that it was prudent to make sure that the clerk's office had the support they need administratively to keep moving the clerk's office forward. So in comparing the duties and responsibilities of what Mr. Grice is currently doing now as a legislative aide within the clerk's office, compared to what a legislative aide would do within the manager's office, is more of an administrative role. Delivering papers for signature and various different things like that, those are more administrative and clerical role. It's more of a clerical role, not a developing legislative type role. So it's to create efficiencies within the manager's office, so you all's vision can come true in a more expedient nature, especially when we're talking about future agenda items. Thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Are you done, Commissioner Bennett?
I'm so sorry. I'm good, thank you.
All right, Vice Mayor?
Yeah, just
Madam
one
Clerk?
thing, Mr. Mayor. I'm here to make sure that the commission needs are met. And whatever that staff person needs to be, I'm okay with it. So if you guys decide you guys want the legislative aid, I'm okay with it. I mean, I did agree to the executive assistant. But, you know, if that's not what the majority of the commission is requesting, then I'm okay with just keeping the legislative aid. So whichever, you know, the desire is, I'm okay with it. As long as the administrative portion of for the city commission is met, then, you know, I'm good.
Vice Mayor.
Yes. It appears to me that it's the term legislative aid that's getting a little, that I'm getting mixed up here. If the term is legislative aid, then let's just take the term legislative away and just say he's our aide. So are we talking about the person or the position? If it's the position, then let's create a legislative position in the manager's office that does the legwork if that's too much for the manager's office to do. If what I'm hearing the clerk say is the position executive assistant, is that the same thing that Mr. Grice does in his capacity? So technically, we would not have anyone that does that, what, you know, the service that, quite frankly, every other city has their own individual legislative aid or aid. We have one that all 5 of us share.
Correct.
So that the service that we are provided, thankfully, does that fall under executive assistant? That's different.
The administrative duties that's currently being performed by Mr. Grice, yes, that would fall under that position.
Okay, so thank you.
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Davis and then Commissioner Taylor.
Really quickly, I just want to say, I think obviously we already have the position budgeted for, so I really don't see the need to recreate a position that already has an allocation. I think it's just a matter of, of course, someone is in that position, and of course that will require some sort of transfer of duties or the role of that individual. So my concern, would be, have a conversation with that individual, which I've said several times on the deals before, and just reallocate the position. I mean, I obviously, noticed that it is a lag when it comes to some legislative items being developed. And, and I don't feel like that responsibility is, solely on the manager's office, given the resources that, that they have. So, I mean, I'm not, I'm kind of in line with the clerk, like, just reallocate the position and, see where the employee wants to fit in. I mean, we already have it allocated, it's already allocated. Why put it back out and, just change things, just have a conversation with the employee.
Mr. Mayor, I want to be clear. That
Hold on, Commissioner Davis, you done?
Yes.
as
All right.
as long as the answer was, my answer was met by the city clerk, it's not the allocation of the position, as long as the same service is offered. And I think that was my concern. So if the position is there, I am not trying to rock the boat of what is happening. I just want to make sure that we're provided the same service under that title. So whatever the chips may fall with the employee that applies for that position, then I'm okay with that. Okay, thank you.
Commissioner Taylor.
To my colleagues, I think what we're missing, well, I do agree with my colleagues on offering it to the person that's already in the position. But that person plays 2 roles, one on the clerical side and one on the legislative side. So what they're proposing I believe, is to divide those roles into two different individuals. One that would be the commission's does the commission's clerical work and on that side, and one that does for the commission on the legislative side. Am I right on my?
Correct.
Okay, so to answer my colleague's question, we in turn will have a person from the clerk's office that will handle us as far as clerical work is concerned, appointments, stuff like that, and scheduling and that stuff. But on the manager side, we will have another individual that will handle us legislatively. So doing research, when we want to propose legislation here on the dais, and they assist us into making that happen. Is that right?
That's correct.
Okay, so to give my colleagues ease and to be okay with it, I guess what they're asking, will we have access to both parties from both departments?
Yes,
And they're our go-to person, the legislative aide to the manager, and our go-to person as the executive assistant from us to the clerk. Is that correct, Madam Clerk?
That sounds about right.
Okay. That's it. Mr. President.
Thank you. All right, so just so we're clear, in what we're moving to right now, we currently are staying with the executive secretary in the clerk's office. And there's supposed to be a legislative aide in the manager's office. All right, looking at the manager's office breakdown on 46 of this page of this budget, I don't see a legislative aide listed there. So could you explain that part?
so the position would be converted over to a special assistant to the city manager and still will handle legislative aid related roles.
So it's going to be a special assistant to the city
Yes.
manager, not a legislative aide.
Correct. But they will be, their duties and responsibilities will be dealing with legislative related roles.
All right, and that's for the city manager.
Yes,
So as we move this budget forward, there will be no one that particularly does research on the commission's behalf to develop policies that our residents and people, different initiatives we go to help us do that research to develop policy. There will be no person
not-
in this next year's budget.
that's not accurate, Mr. Mayor.
All right, so who would do that duty?
That specialist, one of those special assistant positions will specifically work with commission members in developing legislation. So upon legislation being proposed up here on the dais through future agenda items or anything that comes about, that person will be responsible and working on behalf of the manager's office to get that work done. Because as I stated before, it's always been a great line of debate of who's responsible for developing legislation on behalf of commission members. And as stated before, it's the manager's office. So we want to make sure that we have somebody in place to do those duties and responsibilities. So this is not taken away from what the commission currently has. This actually creates efficiencies in that the positions are being separated, the administrative role and the legislative role being separated. It gives more time, efficiency, and energy in getting future agenda items done and getting the commission priorities accomplished as far as legislation is concerned.
I do hope that that is within the job description very clearly, because as the Vice Mayor said, it's a very common thing for a commission and the mayor to have a legislative aide. And in approving this budget, there will be no title of a legislative aide in the city of Opa-locka. We will have to hope that the special assistant to the manager will handle those legislative duties. So I just hope that moves forward. Any other questions or comments on this item? All right, so we do have a executive session starting in 2 minutes. So I have a motion to recess this meeting, and we will have everyone clear out for that executive session. Is that correct, Madam Attorney?
Yes, sir.
Okay. All right, do I have a motion to recess?
Motion to recess.
Second.
All right, I have a motion to recess. So Vice Mayor second, this meeting will be recessed until after our executive session. Oh, don't we vote on that? Okay.
Yeah, staff should just go in the room next door. You guys don't have to like go outside or go away, just transition to the room next door.
All right, welcome to the City of Opa-locka budget hearing. I'd like to call this meeting back from recess. Mr. Manager, could you continue with the presentation?
Thank you. I asked Mr. Anthony to come up.
Good evening again, Bob Anathan, Budget. I had, first off, I want to apologize because my 20-minute presentation took about 45 minutes. And this is going to be an inordinately long night. A recommendation that I made to the city manager for your consideration is to adopt the budget as it is. There's an awful lot of good information that's available to you. Have another workshop, do a budget amendment in October if you need to change the budget, and do it in an orderly way, because tonight's going to run till midnight, I think. Just a recommendation.
Are you suggesting we stop the presentations right now of the rest of the departments and pass the motion at the moment? That's the recommendation?
Not necessarily stop at the moment, but certainly not plan to go through every department tonight. Whatever schedule meets your preferences.
All right, is it possible, because I know with the clerk's office, we went through past accomplishments, objectives, and all those things. Can we limit the discussion to objectives for the coming year? And also any significant budget changes? Is that something the departments can do? Is that something y'all can do to kind of limit the discussion or presentation?
Yes, sir. That's certainly, if that's your preference. I think you're going to find out a lot of the presentations are already structured that way, but there's
Okay.
still a lot of information to look at.
Okay, to my colleagues, or to anyone have any thought to staff? One, that we want to just ask specific questions right now as a commission on this budget, or do we want brief overview with changes, the introduction from the staff? What's the will of the commission?
Mr. Mayor,
Vice Mayor?
I think for me, my questions, I asked them earlier. I did not have any specific staff or department related questions. I'm okay with going back. These presentations they're in our booklet. This is what, the second booklet, maybe third? I'm not sure.
It's first book.
No, I meant that we have on a dais, with the budget. I'm saying this, we've
That
seen
is-
it before is what I'm saying.
Yes, ma'am. That was the one that you got, I think, July 22nd.
Yes, that's what I'm saying,
22nd.
July. So
Yes, ma'am.
I personally don't have any targeted questions for any department specifically, but if anyone else does, then I'm okay with that.
Mr. Mayor,
Commissioner Taylor?
with my colleague, I don't have any targeted questions at this moment. And ones I do, I will refer them back to the manager.
Anyone else?
Mr. Mayor, my only question is relative to beautification, but I'm under the impression that probably would take place during the first budget amendment. So I really don't have any questions relevant to tonight's budget.
All right, Commissioner Bass?
Thank you. Same here for me. I actually went through the budget because I was gone for so long. It took me forever, but I did it. Again, if I have any questions, I will call the parties who's in charge. Thanks.
Okay. All right, I do have a few specific questions I do want to bring up and ask. Could we go into a little more detail about, just for our residents and all that, about our public works and the cleaning up, how many people we have to pick up trash, clean up around the city, and also in terms of our public work projects for this upcoming year?
Yes, sir. I think you'd be best served with the Public Works Director up here at this point.
Mr. Anthony, also, Mr. Mayor, I think to answer a lot of the commission's questions, I think it would probably be prudent the Public Works do their presentation because a lot of it is related to beautification and CIP, correct? Yes.
And the last shall be first. Area Austin, Public Works Director.
Nice one.
Okay, this is a overview of the individuals in each section of the Public Works and CIP department. 5 individuals in administration. I'm not going to go over each line unless you have any questions. Public Works Administration, the only change is 0.9 hours. We move an individual from the vehicle maintenance since we do not have as much administrative tasks in the vehicle maintenance section. They're going to be performing some other tasks in our administrative section for the building operation. First, accomplishments for the building department is the completion of the Ingram Park restrooms and rehabilitation of the roof pertinent to that facility. The Shabunda Village Community Center, we were successful in replacing the HVAC system in its entirety. Fleet management facility, we replaced the roof and removed the skylines that were leaking. So now the roof is in better condition. And we completed routine maintenance to each and every city building and facility since we have the available manpower to do that now. Our objectives in the green will point to the items that are pertinent to our beautification efforts. And one of those objectives to begin with is the park facility painting. We're going to paint 3 park facilities, including Shabunda, Helen Miller, and the old HR facility, which I'm also going to recommend that we come up with a new name for that facility, since after meeting with the engineers, it's apparent that the feasibility is there for us to rehabilitate that facility, but that's going to be coming forward at a later date. We are going to paint all of our gateway features, and I'll display those in an upcoming slide, and develop short and long-term maintenance strategies for our building maintenance. We are assuming the responsibility for maintenance of the 780 facility. And in doing so, we've added an additional individual to dedicate to that task. We implemented a work order management system. We will implement a work order management system to better provide historical data for any work that was completed within the facilities management section. We'll conduct energy audits to better account for the energy use and upgrade our restrooms to be more water efficient. This is an overview of our like I said, we added one individual for the building maintenance shop. And overall, we reduce our expense in that section. Here, mitigation project, sidewalk vegetation eradication program, and Purvis tree planting initiative. We planted 4 to 5 trees on the roadway in the sidewalk portion of the roadway. We accomplished the pothole patching initiative, and that's ongoing. Any city, we're not able to totally eradicate potholes. I wish that was a possibility, but in our climate, that's an ongoing item. Installation of high-intensity streetlights brightened up our city, and with the tree trimming initiative, it's really making it shine. Our objectives for this division is the installation of irrigation systems on our medians and entryways, complete the tree trimming, and at the same time, educate our residents as to their responsibility for the continued maintenance of these trees and the swale area as well. We are going to also continue the pothole patching program. We're going to continue our trip hazard sidewalk initiative and tree planting initiative on the State Road 9. This is one of our entryways that is almost forgotten, and we would like to bring some life back into it by removing the mangled tree plantings that is in the median right now and replace it with 150 ball cypress trees. In addition, this is one of our main entryways to the city for commerce, and it's not identified as you're entering Opa-locka. So we would like to also install an entry feature at that point to welcome our visitors to Opa-locka. We're gonna sandblast our median borders, the curbs on our medians to improve our curb appeal. And we're in the process of rebidding the landscape maintenance contract, which will also include the pressure cleaning of the flat surfaces around the city. We are gonna install barriers in our alleyways to prevent nefarious activities from occurring in those, including illegal dumping in our alleyways. And the slide depicts what has transpired with the tree trimmings thus far. We relegated it to large and medium trees, of which there are 994 total. And thus far, we've trimmed 438, which accounts for 44% of those trees around the city. These are our entry features that will be installing new irrigation system to maintain a static plant system that we could upgrade during seasonal times to improve flowering, include flowering plants for more visibility as you enter our city. The Public Works Road and Street budget overview would be an increase of 3 individuals in that section to lend to the maintenance of our trees and other aspects of the roads and streets operation. So overview of the budget. if you will notice that I just wanted to point out for the road materials, there was a decrease in that line item because since we're milling and resurfacing more roadways, we do not need to buy as much asphalt for pothole patching. So we're mitigating our need for a lot of asphalt material for pothole mitigation. For the vehicle maintenance section, we developed a computerized repair and parts and tire tracking system. And this went a long way at satisfying our operational audit requirements. They were totally satisfied with what we did, but I'll get to that. We obtained a tire changer for internal changing of our tires rather than sending it out to a third-party vendor. And we've enhanced our service procedures to improve turnaround time. Before vehicles were left, but we could not account for what it was there for. So every vehicle that goes to the repair shop now, the requester has to sign off on the work order indicating the work needed to the vehicle. Our objectives is to upgrade our maintenance plan for program maintenance to eliminate breakdowns and to improve the readiness of all of our fleet. Implement maintenance software specific to the fleet section. And we would like to put our parts vendor for our fleet repairs service out to bid so we could acquire the best prices for replacement parts. And you approved recently the removal of the bid for the removal of our fuel tanks, and that one would go forward. Right now, we operate in the shop with 2 full-time employees, which puts us at risk for injuries if one of them are out of the shop or doing something else. So we've increased the personnel by 1 in that section. This shows the overall expense for the fleet section, which is down by $10,000. Public Works, solid waste collection and illegal dumping section. One of our accomplishments for 2021 was that we increased the active time for collecting illegal dumping to 20 hours a week. And we made some improvements in the condition of those areas. Unfortunately, we had a lot of repeat offenders, so we're working to that. We're working with the county to strengthen the anti-illegal dumping program to try and curtail those operations within our city limits. We reconfirmed with Miami-Dade County what our responsibilities are as it relates to the commercial corridors versus the residential collection. With regard to illegal dumping in the commercial corridors, the county assures us that, and Bob spoke to this earlier, that it would be collected within 14 business days. We are trying to see if we could reduce that number by us collecting it. And that's one of our objectives. We are going to increase staffing to allow for 40 hours of dedicated time to collecting illegal dumping along our roadways. And that translates to a beautification initiative as well. We are going to improve our response time for illegal dumping and engage in more community relations to develop a culture for reporting instances scene for illegal dumping. We're working with IT to install cameras in the known offending areas. And that was, we had a prohibition, a problem mobilizing to do so. But now that we have a bucket truck, it makes it a lot easier for us to accomplish this task.
Mr. Austin, questions about Public Works is in regards to the two things. Number one, how many more staff are we increasing in Public Works to do basic maintenance such as trash pickup, beautification of signs, and maintaining of buildings?
So we've increased by 4 for the maintenance of tree trimming and signs, 1 for maintenance of buildings, 1 increase for maintenance of buildings, and 2 for illegal dumping.
And what about for just trash pickup around the city? Is that illegal dumping?
That's illegal dumping. The trash, as you mentioned, I know your focus was previously on the bus benches, and that would be a responsibility of the contractor for the bus bench.
Okay. And also in terms of the equipment, is there any allocation for a truck to, I know there's a truck that has like a little lift on it right now. And I think we only have 1 of those. If we increase another person or 2 more people, will they get another vehicle to do that to increase the efficiency of trash pickup, or how would that work out?
We would like to ramp up with the dedicated staff and monitor it from there. The long-term plan was to have 2 trash trucks if the need arises. We cannot tell at this time because we do not have dedicated individuals to perform in that task. So until such time that we mobilize in a full-time basis to manage our illegal dumping, we cannot tell you what the future holds, and it will come back for budget amendment if the need arises, that we would like to have more equipment.
Okay, so the 2 additional people will be just walking around?
They will be driving around the city collecting illegal dumping in the commercial corridors.
Got it. Okay. All right. And specifically, how many miles of streets will be paved and how many sidewalks will be paved?
2.5 miles of sidewalk and 3 lane miles of roadway for the upcoming year.
All right. Thank you. Those are the questions I wanted to be clear about. All right, you can proceed, or if anyone else have any other questions. That was all the things I needed for this.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I just had one question relative to beautification and I guess the whole trash problem. Would it be feasible to, I know we're still in the process of procuring the bus benches and that whole thing, but in our public spaces, i.e. parks, waterways, bus stops, can we create an initiative where we have at least garbage cans at the least? Because I noticed in many of our parks, public spaces, areas where residents gather frequently, they don't have that option. And I know the conversation has come up in the past, maybe of involving them in some sort of way. I see that you guys have moved to, I guess, include engaging in the community to develop culture to limit legal dumping. But I would like to see, something dedicated on the budget side, even if it's just garbage cans, because if you could remember, Mr. Austin, our meeting with Miami-Dade County, that was the concern that, we just need to educate our residents and ultimately create avenues for them to, live and operate better in the community. So in my opinion, part of that will be establishing garbage cans or some sort of, some sort of initiative, because our waterways are a constant challenge. And yes,
Are you referring to toss-in cans or dumpsters for bulk trash?
tossing cans, so no dumpsters, just small, something inexpensive.
We could address the toss-in cans at our public spaces, but as it relates to the bus bench, we would like the responsibility to fall on the contractor for the bus bench placement.
Okay, can we, I guess at the very least, make sure that's included in the
It is.
RFP that
It
goes
is
out?
a part of the RSP, yes, sir.
Okay, all right.
And there's also a benefit to that because they would like to put additional cans with commercial boards above the cans. So it's gonna move away from the bus stops as well to address some of the areas maybe that you're thinking about.
Nice, okay. Thank you, Mr. Austin.
Not a problem.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor.
Mr. Mayor?
Commissioner Taylor?
Should I curtail my presentation or?
Looking at the will of the commission, I believe they want to ask specific questions.
Okay.
So, Commissioner Taylor?
Not a question, more of a suggestion, and I told you this before about us being proactive. I would like to, Public Works to develop maybe a yearly maintenance schedule that like every December, we paint all parks. Every January, we have something like
I
that.
have that available, sir.
We have that, like every January, we do the gateways. In the summertime, we focus on trees right before hurricane season. That a detailed,
We have a weekly schedule that.
no, not weekly, for the year. Instead of, because I saw your accomplishments, but they shouldn't be accomplishments, more or less. This is something that we do on an ongoing basis.
Correct.
So every year our parks get painted. Every year the gateways get painted because they don't look good. Every year the bus benches are detailed. So something, can we see something like that going forward?
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Mayor Packard?
Commissioner Bass?
Just a quick comment, I guess. You mentioned the lighting, and I'm thinking because of the illegal dumping, when you or we as a city install the extra lights or the bright lighting, I think that's gonna help to lessen that illegal dumping. And I think that's a brilliant idea for the lighting to
That was the
increase.
intent.
Yes, and also you said the camera. And I was wondering if in the layout, if you all will be putting the lighting first where the illegal dumping area are? Or are you just gonna randomly put it somewhere?
We are starting with our hotspots.
Okay.
And since we only have 2 units available at this time for demonstration purposes, we're just gonna start with 2 hotspots and see how it rolls out from there.
When you say hotspots, you're talking about the illegal dumping
the
areas?
Frequent areas where we clean it up
Okay.
today and it's back there tomorrow.
Got you. Okay, thank you.
Mr. Mayor?
Vice Mayor?
I don't have a question. I just wanted to revert back to a statement that I made, I believe back in July. I still think we're putting a Band-Aid on illegal dumping and we're not hitting the problem. Just 14 days of picking up trash as opposed to 20 or 30 days is still to me a Band-Aid. Picking it up sooner than later is not getting to the surface, the root cause of why illegal dumping is happening. I remember stating that research needs to be done in the city of Opa-locka as to why this is a systemic issue. Unfortunately, it's not happening, that research. We're still just putting Band-Aids. So again, September, we need to see or research our neighbor city as to how they were able to combat illegal dumping by sending out correspondence. And I know this for a fact because I have family in this particular city that said, you're going to get fined or else. It's almost like a click it or ticket campaign. we need to make it as a campaign. We have to see this as a campaign, as a city issue. It has to be connected, not just to Public Works, but this has to be connected to the police. This all has to be a campaign that the entire city gets behind. We're not there yet. Thank you.
Anything else for Public Works? All right, thank you, Mr. Austin. Do have a few more questions in terms of beautification, and that's regards to code enforcement. Where we are with code enforcement across the city, and is there any additions into the budget to ensure that we are effectively applying our code across the city so that we can maintain beautiful properties for all our private property owners? Manager or whoever.
Mr. Mayor, Commission, Chief Steve Barrera, Opa-locka Police Department. In the budget, we do have an additional staff member for the administrative part of it, the clerical part of it, with code enforcement. We also currently working on some technology, an e-file, which will significantly help and reduce some of the lag time we have with filing with the county, and it will also help on the residents when they are subsequently cited. I do have, as far as code enforcement members, we do not have any additions right now to the code enforcement. We're trying to be efficient with what we're doing and help increase the efficiency of the process. I know we have some computers and so forth. We also have some additional vehicles to increase our effectiveness out there. Over the last year, I know they had, which would substantiate the additional clerical staff member. From 2019 to current, they had over 943 warnings, 252 citations, and I know they had approximately lien requests of about 450. So we're definitely trying to streamline that process in the budget as far as the clerical time frame, turning it around and increasing the efficiency rather than just going forth with additional staff members. I think it was important to kind of assess how they're doing their job in the process first to make sure that they're doing it efficiently. And then at that point, if additional staff members need to be brought on, knowing that we're doing it as effectively as we can, then that official request will be made through the manager's office to the days.
All right, so what I'm hearing is that in order to improve code enforcement, you're going to increase the staff by a secretary or clerk that can basically ease the time in which writing tickets and putting into a system, and that's going to go electronic.
Currently,
To that, is
Yes,
there
sir.
any training involved with the whole administration, survey, professional development?
Yes, sir. Part of the budget request, if you look at some of the operational costs for the department, included in that is professional development for our code enforcement members. There historically has been lacking in that area as far as training and certifications. Trying to rectify that, there is a significant increase in that training budget compared to what they had.
Got it.
Yes.
Got it. Any other questions for about code enforcement? All right, I want to move on to buildings and licensing. Where we are in terms of accountability for financial oversight into the building and licensing department, and what are we doing to make permitting a little more efficient with this year's budget?
Mayor and Commissioners, Gregory Gay, Director of Building and Licensing. We are in the process of revamping some of our staff and basically making some modifications as to how building and licensing has been operating. While building and licensing has been in a position to be the lifeblood for the city as it relates to the building for occupational licenses and permitting, it does have some challenges as it relates to the staffing that we have. We are in the midst of trying to make a shift as it relates to our staff. We have some staff members that are looking at retirement. We do have some staff members that have some other challenges that they're dealing with. So we're going to make those particular modifications. And the budget is going to be reflecting those particular modifications. We're hoping that we will be adding on 2 to 3 staff members to make it more efficient, to allow for people that have permits that can be easily obtained to have a less challenging process that doesn't take a week to 2 weeks in order to achieve.
So how exactly are you dealing with the financial oversight? I wasn't clear on that from your response. The finance, so we've just had a major issue about financial oversight within building a license. So I want to make sure, how are we, is it moving on to electronic system? Are we doing checks and balances? What are the systems in place to make sure what happened does not happen again with this year's budget?
If I may, there has not been any budgetary modifications, but what has occurred, past practice was individuals taking monies and giving out hand receipts, and now all billing licensing transactions take place in the utility billing office. So all transactions are happening in real time using our cashiering system, and they're properly reconciled on a constant basis. So the whole taking cash and giving that hand receipt does not occur anymore. And all the transactions, all city transactions actually happen in a centralized location within the utility billing office. And that has been going on since prior to this building licensing issue coming up. Even prior to that, when the city was placed on notice that there was issues in building licensing in regards to the tendering of payment, how payment was tendered, and probable criminal activity, we transitioned our operations to the in regards to collecting cash to the utility billing office. So staffing increase is not necessarily required because, like I said, all financial transactions are handled in the utility billing office. Our cashiers are steady at work. And of course, due to the pandemic and due to low collections, there was issues as far as keeping our utility billing staff up to par, up to work, and actually the additional collecting billing licensing related fees has increased their workload to make them a more sustainable staff in 2021 and 22. So the addition of staff at this point would not be necessary due to the level of production decreasing even before the pandemic, after the pandemic, and looking beyond that. So there has been no budgetary increases in staffing, but there are checks and balances in regards to fees, in regards to billing licensing, in regards to utility billing office taking those fees on directly.
Okay. All right. Any other questions built in licensing? All right. Last thing I want to talk about is HR in regards to evaluations going on throughout the city. What's our process for that? Are we moving to electronic system with that evaluations? And then also this conversation, could we talk about this conversation about the removal of healthcare for the commission?
So, Mr. Mayor, I don't have a problem in regards to discussing evaluations. Yes, we are looking at moving towards automated evaluations, and we currently have a proposal in place from ADP that we'll be requesting for implementation during the first budget amendment. Also, I have a proposal on the table for a full top to bottom assessment of our HR department to hopefully occur within the next 90 days. And that will be occurring in order to look at the efficiencies within the HR department, the inefficiencies within the HR department, and put together a plan of action to improving overall employee experience within the city of Opa-locka. As far as healthcare and the removal of it and commission members, I asked Mrs. Lazier to come up. I don't want to put her necessarily on the spot, but that was an audit finding. So I'm kind of, she's not prepared to discuss it now. We can do so later, but it was during the last audit, it was came about, and we were told that we needed to address it because of it looked as if the commission was getting a different level of compensation. And our charter is very specific, and unfortunately, the compensation section of the charter is kind of locked in. And so based on our auditor's first glance and recommendations that were provided to me through staff, it was determined that health insurance is considered additional compensation unless a charter amendment was done, the charter was modified, or that section was necessarily moved out of the charter and placed otherwise in the code, is what I was advised and told. And that was about 3 or 4 months ago. And I don't know if anything changed beyond that. But that was the recommendation that was provided to me at the time.
And this is auditors from where?
When Mr. Brunson was conducting the last audit.
So I did not see that in the CAFR. So there's a finding in the CAFR specifically related to healthcare for the commission. If so, could you point that out to me?
I believe, Mr. Mayor, is a proposed finding in the CAFR in one draft of the audit. It was a proposed finding within the CAFR. And I think ultimately it was not addressed directly in the audit, but it was brought to our attention. But it wasn't a draft form when we were provided the advice. Ms. Lazier.
So, good evening, commissioners and the public. So one of the things that came up during the audit is that we were having some reconciliation issues between the benefits that were being posted and the record. So when we were looking at some of the differences, a lot of the differences were coming from the fact that we were not deducting the employee-related deductions from the commissioners for the health care and the other type of benefits that they were receiving, but the city was paying them. So that's what was causing a difference, right? So on the one hand, we're paying the bill for the healthcare, but there was no deduction coming from the employee's paycheck. So as we investigated it through the audit process, they wanted to understand, okay, well, the compensation for the commissioners is only $500 per the charter, I believe. So why are we paying this additional fee? Although it's budgeted in the documents, it doesn't say that healthcare and benefits are considered compensation. So technically, we're paying this additional compensation that's not truly allowed by your laws and rules. So that's what was causing the difference. And so it looks like it wasn't being properly recorded in the past. And I don't know why it never came up or what the case may be, but your laws and rules don't state that the commissioners are allowed to get this additional benefit. It only states that you're allowed to get the $500 per month, and obviously whatever Social Security, Medicare, and retirement benefits that we pay on that, but you're not allowed to get the additional compensation, and it's not being deducted from your paychecks, which is why we were having an imbalance. We were able to clean up a few of the entries related to the fiscal 19 audit, so that's why the finding didn't elevate, but we're realizing obviously it's affecting fiscal 20. It's going to affect fiscal 21. And so we brought it up to the manager to discuss it with him. I don't know what the implications are, what you guys plan to do for the past. Obviously, you were paying benefits to commissioners that is not required by your laws and rules. So we brought it to the manager so that he can take a look at it and see how he wants to fix it going forward. I think one of the things that we realized in this whole cleanup process with the accounting is that there's a lot of things that probably should not have happened in the past, but if we're finding the issue and it's coming before us, then we want to at least bring it up or raise it to the manager and then give him recommendations on what we think should be done to fix it going forward, because there's nothing I can do about what happened in the past, but all I can focus on is what we can do going forward. So right now there's a conflict between your laws and rules and what you're doing in practice. So it's something that we wanted to bring up to the manager to address. And with respect to the operational audit, The financial audit, they don't necessarily always do a deep dive because they're really just sample testing. So you may not see every problem that exists through a financial audit. But with the operational audit, they do more of a deep dive. So they may look at it in more detail and look at, 40, 50 transactions. That's not going to happen on a financial statement audit. So we're just trying to get ahead of the game with respect to looking at what the problem is, so that if it does come up in the operational audit, well, we're having a public meeting and we're discussing it, but we could at least say that, okay, we've taken some action now that we've identified that there's a problem, right? So we've identified there's a problem, we're bringing it to your attention. What are you going to do to resolve it so that we can go forward in a positive direction? I know I said a lot, but just want to give the background.
All right. Any other comments or questions on that?
Yes, Mr. Mayor. So I don't know if this is a question, just a little confused. So based on your analysis, this is considered additional compensation, but recently we just had conversations or things were paid, and that wasn't additional compensation?
With things that were paid.
I'm gonna leave it like that. So I'm confused. So how is it that this was brought out as additional compensation and it's been on the table for many, many years? And did this go through a particular department? Like what? I would like to know.
So I will say walking into.
Ms. Lazier.
Okay.
So when this came about, each commissioner was provided a briefing with the HR department, myself, Ms. Lazier, and Mr. Anathan. And we went over what the auditor discovered, what we thought was going to be a finding in the CAFR. And before that CAFR was released, we thought it was prudent to meet with each one of you all to discuss it, because it has something to do with something benefit related that may affect you all moving forward. So this is not a situation where there's whatever is being said, but it's not that type of situation. We conducted appropriate briefings with everybody and said this is what may happen. This is what may occur. Everybody acknowledged there's no additional questions. One issue duly noted, Madam Vice Mayor, is what you duly noted. So, but I just wanted to kind of give the history that we did brief every individual commissioner prior to whatever happening. So, thank you.
Okay. I recall the briefing, and what's confusing is that during the briefing, say this may occur, and then we had the audit, and it wasn't in the audit finding at all. And then last week, we received notice that benefits in September 30th. I've been on this dais for 5 years. It's never come up. I know this has been a practice for many years. So to know that, just to break it down a realistic point, that my wife and 3 kids going to lose healthcare in October 1st at the passage of this budget. Maybe I don't know how many others don't lose healthcare during this time, but that's significant. That is significant, and it's no decision of the commission. It's just a decision that just was made for that to happen. So yeah, that's the confusing part to me. I reviewed the operational audit, which did a very thorough and even had findings on healthcare, and that never came up. And then we have an outside entity, and that never comes up. And now all of a sudden, we're going to lose healthcare. And now moving forward, the only benefit at all that anybody that comes to this day is to serve, take time out of their lives, is $550 a month. And that's before taxes and everything else.
So
So it's actually 491. So that is a very difficult situation to put a body of citizens in that want to serve their community. And I just can't believe that this is the case. And I know that we already put on the books to do a charter review. I'm hoping that legislation comes up before us ASAP, so that can be put in place to rectify that change. 'Cause I doubt that anybody would sit here and say that people shouldn't have health care here in this community. Like that's just all employees, everybody gets health care here in this community in this. So it's very interesting that's coming up at this point in time. So
Mr. Mayor,
I want to be clear about that. Yes, Mr. Manager.
if I may, if, the commission, if it's the commission's will to maintain the healthcare coverage beyond October 1st, if the commission wants to pass some legislation stating that, I will be more than happy to continue the coverage. I'm just sharing information that's provided to me. It's not a trick or anything like that. It's something that was provided to me from staff and staff direct asked me to relay the information to the commission. If it's the commission's will, they feel that they should maintain their health insurance. If the commission wants to pass a resolution stating so, I have no problem maintaining the coverage. My job is to identify issues when they come up to me, and I had a fiduciary responsibility to bring that up. At the end of the day, if the commission wants their benefits to maintain the way it is, if a resolution is passed stating that, I would be more than happy to continue those benefits.
Any other discussion on this item?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Davis?
Well, just kind of going back to when we first got in office, it seems like, I guess, many of the items that was deemed as compensation for the commission were taken away. If you could recall, vehicles was actually one of those. So I know early on the state had a problem, with vehicles because it wasn't outlined in the charter or by ordinance. But that was something that we decided not to do. Obviously, medical insurance is a different conversation and more of a need. I personally could kind of navigate around it because I don't have a family that's necessarily tied, to that benefit. And then I also have, employers outside of the city who are unfortunate enough to have options to have them subsidized on the premium. But I do hear your concerns. And if we are to bring it to the commission and provided there's no legal liability and the charter process goes forward, I think it's something that that we should consider. We're still in the middle of a pandemic. And I for one wouldn't want to see, you or your family or anyone, for that matter, go without having adequate, insurance to protect them. So, thank you, Mr. Mayor.
So I know our laws are very, very clear. Being a part of this commission, started the process of not taking any benefits as outlined in the charter with the cars and all those things. So that's a process that's been going on for many years. But this is something that we got to really think about in terms of the future of those that are here to serve in this community, because that is a very normal thing throughout the state of Florida, in all municipalities and government situations. So it's something we need to take care of and move that forward. So we wanted to be clear about that on this record about that taking place with this moving forward. So anything else?
Mr. Mayor.
Commissioner Teller?
To the attorney, can we legally do that?
Well, it sounds like that's the reason this whole thing is coming up, because it sounds that a determination has been made by somebody at some level that it's not legal and to consider additional compensation. It's the same issue that came up just recently with funeral expenses. That's what the case law basically talked about. It's additional compensation. And so to tell you all to go ahead and pass something that, it's already been flagged as a possible audit finding, I couldn't give you that advice. So the best advice would be to go through, a charter review commission and put it out to the voters for referendum.
No discussion on the item? All right, any other discussion on this budget?
Also, Mr. Mayor, to the manager or the attorney, whoever can answer this. In regards to, do we have somebody that does purchasing and procurement for our city?
Through the mayor. So Commissioner Taylor, we have right now in this budget, assistant procurement officer that will be assigned, that will work with Mr. Anthony as far as dealing with procurement. Moving forward.
And that's their sole responsibility?
Yes, that'll be that part-time.
It's an additional person?
Yes, that'd be their sole responsibility.
Okay.
Right now, procurement split between 2 staff members, but we're trying to look at efficiencies in that area as well. So we want to bring somebody in half-time at first and see where that goes, and then potentially increase it to full-time.
Mr. Mayor.
Oh, Madam Attorney.
Thank you. Just a question for the manager, because that's been something that legal has been doing, and as I've expressed to the manager in the past. And so I wanted to know if that's going to be for all of the departments. Will that person just look at procurement for certain items, or, I'm sorry?
That would be for all departments, Madam Attorney. Whoever we bring on will be for procurement for all departments.
Okay.
And take some of the heavy lifting off of your department from doing the extensive work you guys have been doing since you've been here.
Thank you.
So we're clear. So we getting a part-time person. How much in procurement do we do a year?
Mr. Anthony.
I don't have that number immediately available, but I think if you look at operating expense and capital expense, it's probably in the range of $20 to $30 million. Talked at the beginning of this evening, long ago, as it turns out, total cash out the door is about $45 million. Compensation, including benefits and so forth, is probably in the range of $10 to $12 million, let's say. So when you do the math, that would be probably about $30 to $35 million.
All right, so we're getting a part-time person to do procurement, but a full-time person to do $20 or $30 million in procurement. But we're getting a full-time person to develop legislation for the commission.
So the 2030, through the mayor, I'm sorry, Mr. Mayor. The $20-30 million in procurement, if it's a capital project and it's being handled by an engineer, the individual engineer will handle the procurement. So all procurement is not handled through internal procurement personnel. There's some procurement that's handled out through contracts, such as road projects and water projects and various different things like that. That procurement occurs through the engineer of record, not the city. So, and that's how we've been managing projects, and that's how we're going to be managing projects moving forward. So no, not all projects are going to be handled by an internal procurement person. Some of that procurement work is going to be subcontracted through an engineer or a third-party entity.
But if I may, those larger ones are always done through RFPs anyhow, unless it's one of the engineers that's already in the library. So, I mean, it's done through a formal process right now. It's not as though there's no procurement within the city.
So you don't think that we need a full-time person to? You don't think we need a full-time person to handle that?
So through the mayor, I think it's prudent for us to evaluate the process. So we want to bring people on in a way where we want to evaluate processes and efficiencies. Right now, the procurement is kind of dealt with and handled between two staff members. We want to relieve some of the efforts off other departments. So we wanted to look at bringing on somebody to do procurement on a part-time basis, evaluate that. And then during the budget amendment in the beginning, first half of the year, if we want to increase that to one full FTE and make that into a full-time position, great. But we want to kind of evaluate that because understand the city had a procurement officer. When I got here, there was a procurement officer on the books. And we attempted to recruit for that position for a significant period of time. We're not even able to recruit for that position for a procurement officer. So we're trying to revisit it and see if we can approach it in a more part-time basis and see if we can increase it from there. But we did attempt to recruit for a procurement officer in the past.
Mr. Manager, may I add one point to what I said previously? I mean, within the 30 million that I mentioned, for example, we pay Miami-Dade County $5 to $6 million a year. That's not procurement. It's just bills that are incurred. I mean, there's no procurement selection made on that. So I'm going to revise my number downward because I did not include, I included things like that, which I should not have.
The simple is millions of dollars, and procurement is a very traditional role in government. And to see we got literally 13 operational audit findings solely focused on procurement. So definitely we need work, we need expertise, we need someone professionally trained to be certified, goes to conferences and make sure that our procurement, and matter of fact, over the course of the past few months, almost every other agenda we had to rebid out RFPs. So and be able to take away RFP, have to rebid it out because we're not getting solicitation and stuff. So I just find it just odd that we wouldn't want to invest in a full procurement person, especially when we're making changes to bring someone just to do legislation. I mean, we don't really do that much legislation as a commission, as opposed to the number of RFPs and procurement that goes out. So I think we do need to have someone in procurement. That's something that I'm pretty firm about. So
To the mayor.
Commissioner Taylor, I thank you for bringing that up. Mr. Manager.
I'd be more than happy to increase that to one full FTE during the first budget amendment. So during the first budget amendment, Mr. Anthony, let's include that position as a full-time procurement officer. And then let's put it out there and see how long it takes to recruit it for it. Because it's been, like I said, in the past, we've been having recruitment issues. But we're willing to take one shot at it again. And hopefully we'll have somebody part-time on the books at that time. And maybe that person has the qualifications, maybe not. But we will certainly look at that option, Mr. Mayor. Thank you. Thank you, Commissioner Taylor.
Mr. Manager, in terms of, I know we've had a lot of issues with bringing in staff. This assessment for HR, is that going to include the evaluation of our recruitment protocols and those things?
Top to bottom HR, anything that's HR related, top to bottom. Top to bottom, every HR function from benefits to recruitment to internal protocols to training, professional development, all things HR. Just received a proposal about maybe 3 weeks ago. I'm still reviewing it.
Any other discussions? All right. Madam Clerk, roll call.
Commissioner Taylor,
Yes.
Vice Mayor Williams,
Yes.
Commissioner Bass,
Yes.
Commissioner Davis,
Yes.
Mayor Pickett.
Yes.
Motion passes 5-0.
All right. Do I have a motion to adjourn? Moved by Commissioner Taylor,
Second.
second by Commissioner Davis. Everyone have a good night. Thank you for attending our first budget hearing. Take care. This meeting is adjourned.